The Marinade.
There's no O in marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle.
We started arguing on the on-ramp of Interstate 90 West. As the engine strained to recollect 50, and I struggled to keep my head. For the last month I've been scratching your name with my fingernail in the frost of the window pane in the attic of a friend's. I've been staying since we broke it off.
Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 108, and our guest is Izaak Opatz. Izaak is a singer, songwriter, leather worker, and avid outdoorsman from Montana, whose latest record, Extra Medium, was just released. I've had the pleasure of listening to Extra Medium for a while now, and y'all, I'm crazy about it. Opatz is a one-of-a-kind songwriter whose unique skills shine on this record. He's also a fascinating and smart guy, and I'm so excited to bring you this conversation.
In the middle of the winter can do more harm than good. You thought out my resistance and I let you back in. You were unseasonably warm as a Chinook wind. Watching the snow, crying out the
I
pine
got this
trees,
Zoom
standing
thing
around
and
the
I
edge of
was
the
waiting for a phone call.
Oh, it's all good. Is Zoom cool? Does that work?
Yep.
Yeah, it's all good. You gave me an opportunity to continue listening to your record, which I love. Extra Medium, man. I've been having so much fun with it. So thanks for doing this. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
I feel like kind of backing up a little bit, not yet from Mariachi Static, your record Mariachi Static would be a good place to start, because I was listening to that song and I feel like in listening to that and then in also kind of reading what you've written and some interviews with you and so forth, it seems like you lived, like you maybe still are living what like I wish I would have done in my 20s and 30s. And there was so much I could relate to in Not Yet about like expectations that people have and society have. And I fucking gave into so many of those, right? Like I gave into, and I have a great life. I love my life. I'm really happy, but I gave into so many. Like I went to law school because people said, "Oh, that's what I should do," you know. And like I did all these different things that everybody said I should do. I was listening to that song. I was like, "Man, where was this song?" You know, when I was 22. So I think it's a good jumping off point because I'm really interested in where you are right now as a creative and like having gone through some of those decisions and how that informs your process.
Yeah. I wish sometimes I'd taken my own advice too a little bit. Not that it's an advice song, I guess. It's kind of a, you know, in some ways it's me complaining about not taking some of those. It's just struggling with the decision because it's happens in your 20s, but it's ongoing, I think. I mean, people who do take maybe a more traditional path, I hear from them all the time. Usually it shows when they have this idea that like they messed up and they should have done what I'm doing, and I'm looking right back at them and very jealous that they get to go home to their house and their wife and whatever, and they've got a dog and they have a mortgage, and so I mean, I don't know if that's just something that I have struggled with. It's just something I think about a lot, and I think a lot of people do, and so it makes it into my songs. It's kind of where a lot of the tension is in my life, not least because the sort of itinerant lifestyle that I especially had in my 20s was like the main complicating factor for my romantic relationships too. So it was always kind of undergirding I mean, I managed to mess up those for a variety of reasons, but that was always kind of part of the reason, and that's how it became something that I tussled with so much. But I also felt, I mean, at the same time that there are expectations that you settle down and you go to school and you get a job, there are these there are also these expectations that you go out and you travel and you try new things and you push yourself out of your comfort zone. And so it's no matter where you are, unfortunately, it's not going to be comfortable if you're just trying to listen to whatever, people think you should be doing, because there's so many voices out there. So now I'm in school and I'm currently having a hellish homework day, and I wish I was just a leatherworking musician guy, because it sounds so good, even though a year ago when I was just a leatherworking musician guy, I was daydreaming about the structure and the challenge of school. So it's ongoing.
I'm so interested in that, especially like I have 1 week to decide whether or not to start a graduate program. So I have to make my decision by next Friday. And it's a master's in educational leadership and policy with a focus on social justice. It's a wheelhouse for like what I've dedicated my life to, other than, this is more of a very time consuming and fulfilling hobby more than anything else. But as far as my day job goes, I'm in education, and making that decision is so difficult, and I right now have the wife and the 2 dogs and the mortgage and like the whole bit. Right. So I have that kind of stable life, but to make that other decision, and I'm interested in how you process it and how you make some of those decision points, because as you pointed out, when you're on this side, of course, you're going, well, man, that structure looks so nice. And having that homework seems like something that, man, I'm fired up about, actually, because I could use it. Maybe it regulates me. Maybe it fulfills me in a different way. But then when you're there, you even have a highlighter in your hand right now.
Yeah.
When you're there, you look back on that itinerant lifestyle, and I'm interested in sort of how you process those decisions, and how much the music comes into play in that processing.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if it's just something that got ingrained in me early, like a sense of just not wanting to commit, or being lazy, or thinking that, I don't know, I guess, part of it is just that I never, there wasn't I think I really kind of ached to have someplace I knew I should be and something I knew I should be doing. And like a lot of millennials, and I'm sure people before me, that just didn't come super clear, at least not in the form of one thing. And so, I always kind of daydreamed about sharing 3 jobs with 2 good friends, and every 4 months we would rotate, and I'd be a teacher one, for a season, and then I'd go on and be a trail worker for a season, and then I'd go on and be a musician for a season, and get to I tried to kind of do all those things full time and on their own, none of them quite satisfied, which I think is not unusual, but I think part of it is I've been trying to kind of aim towards some life where I have a balance of things that keep me satisfied. And so music is definitely one of those, and I hope it's always there, and I hope I am always able to tour when I want to, for a couple of weeks out of the year, or a couple months, and I always get to record. And then I'd like to be able to be outside as much as possible, and I like making stuff with my hands, and I like doing hopefully important stuff, which is the journalism part. So I think that's kind of what's driven me, is trying to hit this sweet spot but it's on the way there. It feels like I have nothing going and I'm neglecting everything, because everything is being kind of balanced, and certain things are waiting for me to try to figure out the next thing. So I don't know. I think everybody probably has that going on to some degree. But yeah, I wish I had known what I wanted to do when I was, 22. And I think part of me thinks that I could have been really satisfied just being stable and in one place, if I'd liked what I was doing.
That's interesting. I think, it seems like right now you've sort of, from the outside and from what you just said, it seems like you are in sort of a transition into having that rotation that you were talking about, but it's more like a balance for yourself rather than rotating with your friends. It sounds like you're kind of working, maybe you're not there yet where you're comfortable with that balance, but it sounds like, from what I just heard you say, and knowing that you have a few dates on the calendar coming up, but nothing, you sound like you're doing an East Coast tour or something, that you kind of seem to, like, you're working your way into that balance. That seems like a kind of very exciting place to be.
Yeah, I think so. If I can, I still don't know if it's gonna, pencil out money wise, but
Yeah.
at least I hope I'll be at a place where I can just kind of keep evolving, and just there'll be that balance of things that are feeding me, where I don't feel like I need to just all throw it away and go try something else. And I can just kind of dig down and get better at all of them and make them work. But it is, people like to see a certain level of like single-mindedness, as far as people who are going to invest in you, or most people are going to invest in you, whether it's a label or an editor, or I guess a clientele in the leather zone. There is a lot to be said for somebody who just does one thing and can be depended on to do that one thing. So that's the drawback.
That's an interesting thing to process. And it's because I hear that sentiment, but at the same time, there has to be elements of your life that go into the leather work that are not the leather work, right? There has to be, I would assume there are, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the creative process of songwriting, your love of the outdoors, all the things that kind of make you, that nurture you, have to go into whatever work you're doing, especially with something like leather work that is a creative pursuit and a craft. So it seems like, to me, being able to work on finding that balance is really important, because if you were just singular minded with the leather work, it's not that it wouldn't be good. It's just that it wouldn't be the thing that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's also, they just kind of feed different parts of me. I think like leatherwork is a really great place to go and sort of take my head off and just use my hands and not feel like I'm up against some kind of a blank page. But yeah, there's still like an aesthetic and a sense of humor, I guess, that I kind of see that crosses over from music to leatherwork. And I don't know if I made this comparison before, but just like there's something in leatherwork that, that feels kind of country, and there are things that you kind of you expect to see on a belt, or that, like, leather tooling is a very kind of Western thing, and it has there's sort of a tradition to it, and you know what to look for as far as the floral patterns and kind of the Western font. And so this is something that Johnny Fritz, who I learned leather kind of from, he was the first person I saw to do it, is just kind of to use that format, and get really goofy and put stuff on there that you wouldn't expect necessarily. And it feels in some ways similar to, what is happening with like country music right now. It's this sort of, there's a palette that everybody kind of recognizes, and there's certain expectations that come with it. And then it's really fun to improvise and to throw in surprising things that you wouldn't expect to find in a country song.
It's interesting you said that, because your music is singularly your music. The only thing that I could think of, and this came almost immediately to me, probably because it's fresh in my mind because I just talked with him and got to see him play. But the only person doing country music that I kind of like could make a connection to right now is the Colonel. There was just like this, the Colonel?
I knew him through Johnny when I lived in Nashville. Just kind of rubbed shoulders a couple times. I don't know him that well, but yeah. I like him.
There's just something kind of wacky about the lyrics at times, but at the same time, you're taking on kind of heady things, and you're saying things that you can tell that, like with him, he's always talking about how he doesn't want to get bored, And so it seems like when I listen to your music, there's no way to get bored. It's not like you're rehashing the same things in the same way. You may be coming back to themes that are very similar in country music, very common in country music, but you're hitting them from, a completely different perspective. A song on the new record, like Blue Pilot, is just like such a beautiful song, and so wonderfully done. It's very much a country song, but it's like there's a lot of space, I feel like, for the listener, a lot of the space similar to the blank page, right, that comes out in the song, and that we think about, as you mentioned earlier, when you're writing. And I gravitate toward music like that, and like I can really appreciate taking on those kind of similar kinds of themes in some ways, but from a very different perspective.
Yeah. That's not one that I think I would have like. That one is really simple in the way that like country songs can be simple. And I hadn't really made the connection, but it's like, it's just takes, I mean, it started so basic. It's about literally a notepad and a pen that were given to me by somebody who, within the course of a week, broke up with me, and I just had all these my expectations for what was gonna show up on the page using the pen. It's just like a really kind of simple country trope, and I can't think of a good example right now of like a country song that'd be similar. But yeah, it also, because when I think about it, I think of just how kind of wacky the song is, how it sounds really wacky, because we just had a lot of fun recording it, and it felt like chaotic in some ways, but the lyrics really are pretty straightforward.
I love that. I love that it was so wacky. That's awesome to hear. And so that the recording of it was fun, because like, to me, it's really fucking painful. Yeah. like when I love it, it's great. But like, and as I read the lyrics on the page, and I listened to it several times, because I've listened to your record over and over again over the last couple of weeks. And there are a few that stood out, and that's one of them. And I think there's so much about what you do that I connect to. And this is one of them, right? I mean, I've got over in the corner here, probably 70 notebooks, and half of them are Moleskines, and you're talking about filling a lot of Moleskines with discontent, and I'm just like, yeah, buddy, get out of my fucking head. Like, this is, this is something I can 100% relate to. But like you said, it's sort of the straightforward idea that at the same time is wrapped up in a lot of really heavy emotion, and you convey that in a way that's palatable, which is always a trick. It's always kind of tricky to do as well as you did in that song.
That's like the country songs that I like especially the kind of dumb like pop country ones from the last, I don't know, 30 or 40 years, I guess. They sneak in somehow. That's like, they feel fun. The hooks are really fun, and the lyrics are somehow, they've got like enough kind of winking humor that they go down really easy. And then I'll find myself like at the crux of the song, like in tears, in a such a surprising, embarrassing way, because it's just like what I thought the song was to me is is can just change in an instant, because something's happening like subconsciously, while I'm kind of laughing at the jokes, and I'm kind of laughing at myself for liking the sound of it. The message is getting through, and sometimes it just kind of shows up in a way that just doesn't happen with other kinds of music. And I think it's because, as simple as it sounds, it's operating at a couple of different levels.
Yeah, I like that a lot, man. I think that seems to be kind of a theme too with your music. Another one that really stood out to me was Chinook Wind, which is a single already, right? Is that one out? Yeah. Yeah. Great tune, man. And but again, there's like this, I don't know, that one's super fun to listen to and not as fun to really read and sit with the lyrics, right?
Yeah,
like
I agree.
That one's super fun to listen to. I was listening to it again today and was like, Jesus Christ, man. Now I'm sitting in the steam with a cold gin and tonic, sweating in a plastic cup, trying to make sense of your sudden change of heart. If that's what it really was, when this lover's coming back to you on Valentine's Day, right? It's just like, but it's horns come in, there's like all this super fun juxtaposition with this really, really heavy stuff. And it's one of those songs that continues to give. What's your process like in general? Like, are you a sit down and do the work every day kind of person, especially now that you have so much going on? Can you do that? Or like, what does the writing process look like for you?
It's pretty slow. It's a lot of knowing that something has a song in it, like this experience that Chinook Wind is about. I knew that there was a song there, but it just took, it took a year or so. Not even of like trying to write the song, although I'm sure I did, but just kind of thinking about it, trying to like distill it in my mind, which sounds dumb, but I will kind of, I have to figure out what it means to me before I can write the song, and that takes me a long time. I'm kind of that way, just in general, emotionally. Like I can't process things in the moment. I like have like my gut reaction to it, but I can't actually totally tell what's happened. And so I think it's songwriting is as a part of that, and it's a result of that. So yeah, this was something I mean, it all kind of fell into place with the metaphor of the Chinook Wind, which is, I don't know where that showed up in my mind. It's something you kind of hear about in Montana because it's a somewhat regional phenomenon. And it took a long time of thinking about what had happened, how it had felt to me, and then how the metaphor applied. And I really can't say it was like sitting down and figuring it out on a piece of paper. It was more just kind of thinking about it, picking up the guitar, thinking about it some more, giving up, coming back. So it takes a while for me.
How often it sounds like you're a pen to paper person when it comes to writing.
Yeah.
How often do you come back to those ideas? Like, is an idea like Chinook Wind constantly kind of ruminating, and each day the melody's there or some thought is there or whatever it is, and you have to go back to it? Or is it sitting in that notebook for a while and you go back and leaf through and you're like, oh shit, there was that idea?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. If there's an idea for a melody or something, I'll put it in a voice memo, and then I'll write down the lyrics separately. And if they're worth remembering, even if I can't remember what it is, I'll know that there was something there. And so I'll kind of go through a period of just spitting out these pieces of things that feel good. And maybe it's just a time when I am picking up the guitar every day, which isn't always, or it's a time when enough space has intervened that I can I'm processing things more. but that's kind of its own period. And then there'll be a time when I'm really motivated to start putting things together. And it's like finding melodies in the voice memos, and it's flipping through and being reminded of certain lines or whole choruses that I'd written down and stitching them together. And it's something that happens like once every year and a half, which is kind of crazy. But I write every day. I pull out my notebook every day, but usually when a batch of songs comes together, it's kind of all at once, but not very often.
That's super interesting. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say it quite like that, because I know a lot of, like, some folks, either it's every day and they're really, there's a song, and whether it's good or not, there's a song every day, or it comes in a huge rush and there's just dry in between. It's interesting to hear that you're putting down that work every day, but then when the songs come, they come in a rush. I feel like there's probably some transferable lessons and maybe something that to process after this conversation, but I'm really interested in that thought. As a creative person who sits down to write every day, I always am like, I think in the back of my mind, I'm always trying to make something that I want to put out, even if I don't put it out. And I wonder if there's some transferable lessons for a lot of us to say, like, maybe you're just doing that work every day. It doesn't necessarily need to show up to be a finished product that moment, or even in the next 6 months, a year and a half later, you may have this whole body of work that you're proud of.
Yeah. I think, like, hope I'm not interrupting you, but
No.
I've noticed when I'm trying to write songs, or I feel like there's a potential, like there are sometimes when maybe I'm kind of dejected about it, or I just haven't had any good ideas in a long time, and I kind of stop even trying or thinking that it's a possibility. But for the most part, I'm always kind of like hoping that something can turn into a song, and like have my kind of radar tuned into things, my own emotions, things that are happening around me. Just kind of, sometimes I'll hear things that sound like they could be a metaphor for something, and I don't even know what that'll be for, but it just kind of has a good ring to it, or it's an original kind of tangible idea. And that, just being in that headspace really helps, and it makes everything seem like it all has potential to end up in a song. And I've heard journalists, like people who have pretty well practiced, they're doing journalism, they're pros, they're kind of in it every day. It sounds like they start to see stories everywhere, and they just get overwhelmed because they realize that everything could be a story, and they just don't even have enough time. But as somebody who's just starting, I'm like just scrambling for ideas, and I feel like you kind of reach a certain speed, and luckily I kind of know what that feels like in songwriting, where you kind of just devote enough energy to it for a while that you stop thinking about it as much, and you just sort of are processing things through a new lens. And it's nice to know that is a thing for journalism as well, because right now it feels harder.
That's a great thing to remind yourself of, right? Is that, like, of course it feels harder, right? It's new, right? And journalism was going to build on your strengths. Certainly, you're clearly an outstanding writer, and that it's going to build on, and your powers of observation come through in the music. Your ability to translate what you see and what you feel is clearly there. And to be able to do that objectively, though, is a little bit different, right? So like, you've got the foundation, but it is interesting to hear some of that sort of like, I'm not sure exactly what the word is I'm looking for here, in terms of like just you processing the difference between these are the things I'm feeling versus sort of like that objective perspective on things, and maintaining that. That's a really interesting dichotomy.
Yeah. And being able to write on deadline too, since I just said that it takes me sometimes a year and a half to write a song.
Right,
So
right.
that's something I'm wrestling with today. Is like, God, can I really do this? Because it's a different feeling when it's just you can really let it come song wise. But it's also a really good lesson because I know there are people who are a lot more dedicated, maybe impatient with themselves about getting songs out, and less precious about what they commit to paper or recording. And so I think I could definitely stand to, put a little bit more pressure on myself time wise or whatever, and a little bit less pressure on myself quality wise, just to keep moving and practicing and stuff. And that's something that I think journalism is teaching me.
It's interesting. I just talked to Ryan from the band The Builders and the Butchers, and he was talking about how he has to kind of like, in order for him to write songs, he always kind of has those ideas floating around, but he has to give himself sort of like self-imposed deadlines. So he'll say, okay, I've got to go pick up the kids from school at 5 or whatever. I've got a 30-minute window. I have to write this. And those self-imposed deadlines end up being really helpful for him versus if somebody else imposes the deadline, or if there's like a, studio time he has to worry about. But those self-imposed deadlines, like he's going to be more faithful to himself in writing that. He didn't put it that way. That's the way I translated it. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he does make these self-imposed deadlines, which I found interesting and might be helpful, we talked a lot about like you mentioned working with your hands with leather working. You mentioned trail work that you've done. I'm really interested in that wonderful essay you wrote on Talk House. You talked about the trail work. I could picture you there. You said that summer I grabbed my notebook, dug out my Carhartts, and assumed my spot in the old tableau, scribbling, hiding in the woods. And like we hiked Glacier, my hiking buddy I did last summer. And we did about 4 days in the backcountry. We started at Packers Roost. We camped at 50 Mountain and Mokawanas Junction and Elizabeth Lake. And then we finished at Mini Glacier.
Cool.
Stunning, incredible hike, right? Incredible experience. Yeah. And it like, I think I've told the stories on the podcast, so I won't rehash them, but it was just one of those trips that like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and that's those are my favorite trips, right? The ones that like really push you. Like the sole of my boot fell off 2 miles in. Like we bear sprayed ourselves on accident. All the shit that can go wrong in the backcountry, other than, actually being attacked by a bear or something, all the shit that humans could fuck up, we fucked up. Right. And it was just, but that, as that part of the world is just so incredible. But when I'm hiking and I've been backpacking for many years. And when I backpack, I always kind of like have these things that when I get off the trail, I end up writing and I end up having thoughts on. And so like, we'll go to a bar the next night after I get off the trail and I'm just furiously scribbling. But when I'm out there now, granted, we only do 4 and 5 day trips, so it's not like I'm out there doing trail work, but it's just like, I'm hungry. I need to poop. That's sort of like my brain just goes, where am I going to find shelter? That sort of thing. So I'm interested in it, you as a creative, as a writer out there, if you're able to like really sit down and write anything that lasts.
No, same thing. That's good to hear. Cause I was just like, I assumed I was just too tired at the end of the day. I would write and maybe occasionally things would come up, but yeah, it's kind of interesting to think that that being self-reflective takes a certain amount of energy or something. But it's also, I think you just kind of enter a different mode where, your needs are not met automatically, and you're just kind of consumed by getting home or getting back to the tent and putting on a dry shirt and maybe bathing in the creek and then drinking a beer and then playing cards. and it's like all you can do, and it feels overwhelmingly good. Like, no, I was always kind of there. I even brought guitar back with me sometimes, and I would more often than not neglect it for 10 days at a time. So, but I loved coming back and being so excited to play guitar. So I think that was where it helped, and just kind of that separation, I think, can be really nice, just to remind you why you like playing guitar, being self-reflective, singing, playing shows. But yeah, I think a lot of people thought I was back there. I was definitely writing. I was scribbling my feelings out, but it wasn't gold. It was, like you said, very much had lunch.
Yeah.
Miss girls.
Yep. 100%, dude. Yeah. And I think there is something great about that. The deprivation, and Montana in general, in my experience, in that week we were there, about 10 days, I guess. And we drove around and we found this crazy little town. I'm going to butcher it, but Dupuyer. It's like named after like the back fat of a buffalo, I think.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Native American word for the back fat of a buffalo is that town's name. We stopped that little place called Buffalo Joe's. And it's just like this weird oasis in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And I live in Central Florida, and it's just like, growth everywhere. Right. And so there was something really healthy for me about just being deprived of like, people for a long period of time. And just when I came back, I was writing songs, and I was writing, just all these things were coming up. And I was like, I guess I could do this on a daily basis, but the deprivation, especially being in the backcountry, and it seems like Montana, for me at least, I don't know if this is the same feeling you get, having lived there for so long, but like, there's something about the space of it, that sort of allowed me, at least creatively, to just like not focus on all of the stuff that I typically focus on, whether that's freaking out about the state of politics in the world or well, I was going to say climate, but the glacier was on fire when we were there. So that doesn't really, but you see what I'm saying, though? There's something about place, and specifically Montana as a place, that allowed me physical and sort of like creative space to make stuff.
Yeah. I mean, a number of the songs on Extra Medium are about or reference like LA versus Montana, and that was something that was a constant. Was I hardly wrote songs at all in LA. I tried, and I just I was kind of always on edge a little bit, and I just didn't feel like I had the kind of, there was literal like space issues, or I just didn't feel like I had the kind of privacy I need to just mess around with stuff. There was just a lot more people around. But yeah, something in my headspace too. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm from Montana and I'm more comfortable here. But I came back after a couple of years there, and that's when I wrote pretty much all these songs. It was over the course of a summer back in Missoula. And I don't know. Yeah, I think there is something like, there's just, whether you're actively processing it or not, just all the stimuli of cities, and that they, part of you is dealing with that, and it's taking up bandwidth, and it's for me, it's keeping me from kind of getting to that like REM stage of just staring at the wall and thinking and being like honest with myself. So I don't know. I know there are plenty of people who are really inspired by being in cities, and LA especially, and it's there have been many songs written there, I think. So yeah, it's, I don't know. But it's interesting to hear you say that, because like having grown up elsewhere, or spent most of your life elsewhere, that it had the same effect. Because it definitely, especially that east side, like the Bouyer and that east side of the Continental Divide, it just is so open, and there's something special about it. It's not boring. It's very wacky, and there's a lot of possibility, and it just yeah, it kind of opens you up, and I don't know what that is, but
it is wacky, man. That little place, if folks listen, if you're ever in that part of the world, find that little town and go to Buffalo Joe's. It's just the dude's like went to school in Alabama, and his wife's from there, and like from that little town, and the local meeting hall saloon or whatever shut down in that little place, and it was run by a local Native American leader, and they didn't have the money to keep it going, and so his wife wanted him to kind of build a place where everybody could come together, where like the Native American folks could come together, the white folks could come together, and then there are colonies of
Hutterites.
Yes. Hutterites, right? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those folks come in. And so you're in this little saloon that's like really nice. It's a really nice spot, and like fancy prime rib and stuff, but it's there's no pretense. And like, it was such a wonderful kind of microcosm of what I experienced in Montana as a whole, that all these people were coming together in this place, and but the pace of life was very chill. And there was like Buffalo Joe himself was back there bar backing, and like talking about how his bartender was too busy. There was like 15 of us in there. She was fine, but she had it under control, but he was just chatting everybody up and telling the stories. And and there's the local Indian chief was there, and he had his there was like a beautiful painting of him. He was like sitting in front of this painting, like he had a special table and was like clearly treated with respect. And like, it was cool. It was a cool experience and very inspiring for me, who like walks to the Walgreens, each day. There ain't no Walgreens out there in that little part of the world. So there is something incredibly inspiring about that. We talked a little bit, we're talking about space, and we talk about like your time doing trail work. You're out there with other people, but still when you're in the backcountries, there's a lot of solitude, right? And there's a lot of just time with yourself. One of the themes that comes up a lot in your writing, and we've talked about a lot, there's a lot of hugging and a lot of kissing with a lot of ladies in the songs, a lot of like romance.
A lot of thinking about hugging and kissing.
Thinking about hugging and kissing. Okay.
More of that than the actual.
Right. Well, because I was curious about like you are you a more solitary person? Are you a more social person? And how does, especially as you talked about LA and the differences, and how much does either being alone or being around other people inform your creative process?
Yeah, I'm definitely a more solitary person. I really like people. I get exhausted by being around big groups. So yeah, I'm a little bit, I can be kind of territorial with my solitude. But I don't know, all my songs are about people, and I love hearing from people and what they do and what their parents did and where they're from. Like the boring questions are really fun for me. But yeah, as far as how it's informed my music, I don't know. I guess I spend a lot of time thinking about people. Part of being on the road or living places that I'm kind of pushing myself out of my comfort zone. When I was living in Nashville or LA, I would tend to daydream about people in other places, and that's definitely a big part of the songs. And I guess, like I said, processing things can take a while, and so sometimes the songs are not messages to other people in particular, but they're kind of it can be sort of a clearing of the air. It's like some people are really good at sitting down and getting to the bottom of a relationship, and for me, I seem to need to do that on my own. But I also am I try to be really conscious of the fact that I'm writing about other people by myself, that I'm like have some sort of, not power, but just like, it's a very one-sided thing, and my songs are so first person that I try to be really conscious of not just complaining about somebody because I felt a certain way at some point. So that's another, I think, kind of in some ways I'm grateful that it takes me so long to process things, because I feel like I end up sitting on them long enough that they may still be about how hurt I feel or felt, but they're a lot more circumspect and kind of balanced, I think, at that point.
That's super interesting. That's a constant struggle, right? That idea of like, maybe I'm writing a character, but that character is based largely on somebody I know, or maybe I'm writing about a person I know and I'm taking artistic license with what I'm writing. These are real people, and the responsibility that comes with that. And there's one school of thought that says like, well, fuck them, it's art, right? Like, I got to write what I got to write. And there's another school of thought that I kind of heard you articulate, which is sort of like, these are real people, and I got to kind of be aware, especially since I'm writing them myself in solitude. They're outliving their lives. It's an interesting tension, and I don't know that anyone has an answer, but it's an interesting thing to wrestle with.
Yeah, and it's not that I'm not saying that I like pull punches and I don't express things that I want to about them. It's that I have those feelings early on, and it just feels like such a blur in my head that it's nothing I could ever write or sing about. And so it's just like, I kind of know a song's ready when things sort of come into focus. And at that point, I mean, when relationships come into past relationships, anything that was hard comes into focus, almost 100% of the time you realize that you were just as much at fault as the other person. And so it's not like it's I don't know. There's this moment of like, when I know it's like a true story or a true song, when it feels balanced in a way, and there's enough kind of accounting for my own faults.
I related so much. I believe it was in that same Talk House essay that I referenced earlier, that there was a quote, I saw it somewhere, where you said, sometimes I find out I'm the asshole when, talking about like, looking back at, that resonated so much with me, the idea of like thinking back on relationships and how, maybe in the moment I was like, thought the other person was being the asshole, and there was like a lot of assholes going around, oftentimes I look back and coming to a place of grace with myself and going like, that was past me, and recognizing like, past me fucked up. I need to make sure I don't do that again. I need to make it right. But at the same time, that was past me. And so it's a lot of times it's difficult to not just beat yourself up. And I've found at least that like putting it on the page or putting it out there does help kind of like help me move on in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's, if it's just describing something that you did and something that you feel, that's one thing. And maybe it wouldn't be as helpful, but trying to, it's just another, like, knowing it's a song is when it kind of, for whatever reason, if it's some sort of metaphor or it's a direct kind of connection, just connecting your experience to, something larger. I feel like that's what a chorus is for, is to kind of broaden things out. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, but the act of doing that is also like, I don't know, makes you feel a bit less self-involved, and it makes it feel worth writing. And I don't know. It's that's the trick, though, I guess.
Mm.
And that's what makes it worthwhile to other people too. If there's just a little bit of a toehold to see yourself in it.
Right. That's great, man. You got work to do, and so I don't want to keep you too long, but I totally skipped over something that for context, because I got so excited about talking about Montana and Buffalo Joe,
Sure.
that I totally skipped over. For context for folks listening, how you ended up in LA. Could you just kind of briefly talk about, because I think that's a really interesting part of your life, and then also very helpful for context with what we just discussed.
Yeah, as far as I mean, I ended up there. I met Johnny Fritz in Nashville in I don't know, 2013 maybe. I reached out to him as a fan, found his email, and emailed him, and just kind of started a correspondence for maybe a year or something, just once every couple months or even less. And at some point I decided to move to Nashville, and I asked him if he knew anybody who had a place, like a room to rent, and yada yada yada. Ended up that I ended up renting a room from him, met him there, became buds, and then this was kind of when I was really going back and forth between doing trails in the summer and other things in the winter. And so I spent a few winters in Nashville and a summer, and then Johnny moved to LA, and I a year later or something, I went out there. He was house sitting. He had a string of house sitting gigs that was about 2 years long, and he just knew that many people, and he's great at networking. So I went out there, and for a few months house sat with him and stayed wherever he was staying. And sometimes he had 2 house sitting gigs on the same night, and I'd get my own place. Maybe it didn't, I think it was a couple months. In the meantime, he was showing me how to do leather work, because his business was kind of taken off and he could use another hand. And so I went out there to help him with that, because I had zilch else going on. And that's when I was playing music, before that, but I met Malachi De Lorenzo, who ended up producing and engineering and playing whatever instruments I didn't play on Mariachi Static. And then he's been in my band ever since, and we recorded Extra Medium together as well. So
what an amazing turn of events. You deciding to email Johnny, who you were a fan of, leads to all these different life-changing things. It is such an interesting lesson in reaching out to people, telling people you appreciate them is what I gather from that, right? Is saying, hey, I think you're awesome. And how that goes a long way to both establishing relationships and then just encouraging people who are doing things you appreciate. There's so many great things that clearly have come, life-changing things that came from you sending that email. Yeah,
it's wild to think about. And Johnny didn't have to respond to it, and the timing just worked out perfectly. But it's definitely this weird little wrinkle in the universe that is 100% responsible for where I am now, even though I'm not in LA anymore. But yeah,
right. But the leather work, the records, those are huge parts of your life, clearly, and all those things. Had you not, who knows? Maybe you would have found your way into leather work, and maybe you would have made those records. But
yeah, who knows?
That's wild, dude. Well, this has been great, man. We always end on what you're getting down on, the art that has you inspired at the moment, music maybe you're listening to, you saw a painting, a book you've been reading, whatever you're fired up about.
Gosh. Oh man, yeah, I'm a bad boy as far as art goes right now, because I just have not been.
It could be like a textbook, maybe something that you're, maybe in your program that you're fired up about. I'm interested in that too. So.
Well, I mean, the thing that I've really I wrapped up with right now is this story about there's a reservation, an Indian reservation in western North Dakota called Fort Berthold, that's home to the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people. And so that's what I've been writing about. There on the eastern edge of the Bakken oil field. And so it's this kind of unique situation where they have a kind of a lot of resources all of a sudden. There's a bunch of money that's come in, and but they have this just learning. You know, it's kind of a unfortunately common story, but theirs is especially kind of wild. They have this. The Missouri River goes right through there, and it was dammed in 1953, so not that long ago, and it flooded out like this whole area that was they completely depended on. It was where all their best farming land was, and timber and stuff. And they, you know, the U.S. government made this decision pretty much on its own and buried their homeland in water. And anyway, so I've mostly been reading about that, and there's a ton of other, I mean, history that's I just, as growing up in Montana, working in Glacier National Park, right adjacent to the Blackfeet Reservation, and on land formerly, you know, occupied and owned and lived on by the Blackfeet. Some of the just the federal policies, the Allotment Act and the Indian Reorganization Act, like I hadn't taken the time to totally process it, I guess. And I'm really grateful that I'm getting to do that now, because it's really horrid, and it lives on. You know, the impacts are just, when you think about it, none of that was very long ago. So anyways, that's what I'm reading.
I'm so glad you brought it up, because the more awareness that we can bring to those particular issues, the better. I'm incredibly ignorant about everything related to how the federal government has and continues to treat Indian folks all over the country. And it's one of those things that only in the last, and this podcast is what kind of got me going. David Huckfelt was on the show, and that's one of his passions, is bringing awareness to Native American culture and to all the political issues that get buried, that don't find the headlines. And I think, especially as someone who grew up in the South, you know, for me, it's always black and white race that I'm so preoccupied with, because we're faced with it constantly. Right. And I'm constantly faced with systemic racism in that form. And so it's really good to have these conversations and to continue to encourage people to just read as much as they can and learn as much as they can about these things. Because like you said, it's ongoing. And I think it's not on the front page, you know, the way a lot of other issues that rightfully should be talked about also are. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I'm glad you couldn't think of any records or anything. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Beatles.
Okay. Oh man, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Extra Medium is wonderful. And the physical copy too, for folks listening, I'm going to have to order one. It's beautiful. And it looks like you don't have a whole lot left. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and pull the trigger on that tonight. Give me one of those vinyls, because it just absolutely looks absolutely beautiful in the photos. But the record's wonderful, and I'm so grateful for your time and energy, man. And just, again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. You too.
Like a Chinook wind blowing warm through the woods. A pulse of June in the middle of the winter could do more harm than good. You thought out my resistance and I let you back in. You were unseasonably warm.
Izaak Opatz, y'all. Thank you so much, Izaak. Thank all of you for listening. IzaakOpatz.com for all things Izaak. That's IZAAKOPATZ. You can find his wonderful leather work there. You can find physical copies of his record. Just so excited to have this conversation with Izaak and really looking forward to y'all getting a chance to hear the record. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade, including written pieces, photography, our online store, and more. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. Those are all free ways you can support The Marinade. And if you really like what we're doing, please consider joining our Patreon community, where for just a few bucks a month, you can gain access to Patreon exclusive content. Things like our show, Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making The Marinade. We've had so much fun over there. Sometimes we'll put part 2 of a conversation that maybe didn't fit as part of the feature episode. We'll kind of do bonus content like that. Sometimes I just tell stories about making the Marinade and the creative things that have been happening in my life. I also post what I'm getting down on, which is an examination of the art that is inspiring at the moment. I put that over on Patreon. Sometimes we get together for Patreon happy hours. Patreon.com/Marinade Podcast if you are interested. And if you want to support the show financially, but you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I get that. You can Venmo or PayPal us. Just look up The Marinade at The Marinade, and you'll find us. All the money goes right back into the making of the show. That covers costs for going to festivals and shows. It covers, recently we bought a new computer, new microphone, those kinds of things. So it all goes right back into the show, and I really appreciate it if you can swing it. But above all, just thank you so much for listening and spreading the word about the show. All right, y'all, it's time for our Review Under 2, the segment of the show where I review some work of art that has me fired up and try to do so in under 2 minutes. The Review Under 2 for this episode is the wonderful book Swing Kings by Jared Diamond. Swing Kings is about more than baseball. It's about institutions, pedagogy, and relationships. It's a revelatory look at how systems are resistant to change and how much they would benefit from getting out of their own way. Jared Diamond's book examines the recent home run revolution in baseball and the unsung heroes behind radical changes in thinking. Outsiders like Craig Wallenbrock and Richard Schenck, names that are foreign to all but the nerdiest baseball fan. The book is more than an egg-headed look at the game of baseball. The lessons in Diamond's examination of how a group of outsiders changed the game provides lessons for any organization. Baseball has long suffered from the tyranny of purists. Things have always been done a certain way and thus should continue in that manner. Those of us who play the game grow up being taught to swing the bat by, quote, squishing the bug and swinging down on the ball. As Diamond points out in Swing Kings, the prevailing attitudes were so entrenched that even Ted Williams, who was perhaps the greatest hitter of all time, was ignored when he pointed out how coaches were getting it wrong. Swing Kings is a human story. Its characters are resilient, open-minded, and rigorous in their approach to work, and the book is an inspiration for anyone who endeavors to be the same in their own life. All right, y'all, that's my Review Under 2 for Swing Kings by Jared Diamond. I don't remember where I saw something about this. Somebody had mentioned it in something I was reading, and it just sounded like, my cup of tea. And it was, baseball is, if you listen to this show, one of my great passions. And, it's kind of like, I think, as I mentioned in the review, Swing Kings has these lessons that I'm trying to apply to my own life, especially as I think about the things that I devote my energy toward. My podcast, for example, I've done it for almost 5 years now. We have had a pretty similar structure the whole time. And some of that structure is in place for a reason. Y'all like it and I like it, and that shouldn't change. But at the same time, hearing diverse voices and hearing people outside of this industry, so to speak, is important. And the same thing is true for my career as an educator, for any writing that I do, relationships, just trying to think about like how we can kind of get so siloed in the work that we do, whatever that is, and how important it is to hear voices outside of that work, especially if it's, when you talk about specialized things such as being a middle school teacher, right? Or being a songwriter, whatever it is that you do. Once you've done it for a while, it's really easy to kind of like, I don't know, just sort of get stuck in your ways, for lack of a better way to say it. And this book really opened my eyes. Plus, it's just a fun read because I love the game, and it's so interesting to see what's happening with baseball, which, despite a bit of a PR problem, is so exciting right now. And I'm grateful for Diamond's work, and recommend reading Swing Kings. Even if you're not a baseball fan, there's plenty in there for everybody. Y'all, thank you so much. We've got so many great episodes coming up. This one was wonderful. Isaac's record, Extra Medium, is now available. Check it out. We've got John Doe on deck. We've got Ryan from the Builders and the Butchers. We've got another Matt Woods episode that I'm going to get to work on this afternoon. Just so many great conversations that are ready to go anytime now, and I'm going to work as hard as I can to get those out to you as quickly as possible. I'm so grateful for every one of you who listens. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.